Heyo everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be talking about episodes 257 through 259, which will be covering manga chapters 366 through 370. Okay, so here we go. I've been waiting to talk about these episodes for a while now, and I'm sure many of you know why if you've seen these episodes, because of a certain superhero from our hearts has arrived to save the day. So yeah, the synopsis. The Rocket Man group braved the insane waters of the Aqua Laguna to catch up to the Puffing Tom. While on the Puffing Tom, Franky, Usopp, and Sanji band together to move forward through the train to reach and rescue Robin from the clutches of the CP9. Alright, so differences. There really aren't that many differences here in these episodes. However, one of the big ones is the actual Sogeking theme song sequence is an anime original. So he does sing the lyrics in the manga. Obviously, it's just written down. But the theme sequence, as well as Yamaguchi Kappei actually singing with the accompanying instrumental, is just legendary in the anime. And so that is something that I think the anime has over the manga. Another thing that's kind of unnecessarily inserted is the shots of Nami getting changed. Like, she still changes clothes in the manga, and Polly freaks out, but all of that is displayed via a wide shot of the Rocket Man from outside, and then when we cut to the interior, that's when Nami is already changed. And then the final two scenes of Sanji and Franky's fights were moved up a bit for pacing and timing. And so in the manga, we don't actually see Sanji break out the knives till after Sogeking makes contact with Robin. Similarly with Franky's fight with Nero, that doesn't begin till after that moment as well. And so I think they shifted a couple things around so that they could end this episode on the cliffhanger of Usopp making contact with Robin. And so I think that's why they moved those fights up a little bit. But yeah, that's about it in terms of changes. These, again, the entire Water 7 is adapted fairly faithfully. All right, so let's get into these episodes. To start this set of episodes off, we're introduced to the Marine Captain T-Bone in the fifth car, who shows himself to be an incredibly caring and self-sacrificing Marine who deeply cares for his subordinates to the point where he's willing to rip a piece off of his Marine uniform cape just to treat a simple bug bite wound. And this has a pretty funny gag that pays off later associated with it. But as you know by now, I have a soft spot for honorable Marines. And T-Bone is no exception, as he's not only hilarious, but incredibly earnest. One funny thing of note that is left out of the anime is that in the manga, he gets like a traditional introduction bio box. And in it, the manga says that his hobbies are helping people, and his motto is Ichinichi Hyakuzen, which is funny because it's a joke based on a Japanese proverb, Ichinichi Ichizen, which means one good deed a day, or essentially try to do one good thing a day. Or more commonly in America, it's something akin to to small deeds or small good deeds add up. But T-Bone's, the Ichinichi Hyakuzen, is 100 good deeds a day. And so he takes his hobby of helping people to an extreme level, as is showcased in his sort of character introduction here in the anime. However, despite this kind and caring nature, the Marines note how creepy and scary his face is. And yeah, I love this weird sort of juxtaposition and Oda's random humor. Moving on, as we get back to the Rocket Man, Sanji makes contact with Nami and they trade updates while the Galila and the Franky family do everything they can to break the massive Aqua Laguna wave that's impending soon. However, whatever they do, they can't get it to budge, and it looks like a pretty dire situation until Zoro just coolly tells Luffy, "Let's go." And God, this is just so smooth. Like, seriously, Zoro and to a lesser extent Luffy are just dripping with cool epicness, and it just sends chills up and down your body. Seeing how freaked out and urgent, everyone is while Zoro and Luffy are just nonchalant about it makes this moment even cooler as they just get up and climb to the front of the train. One thing I really love about this scene is how Luffy is fully aware of what Zoro's moves are called, especially since Luffy hasn't really seen Zoro use a 108-pound Phoenix, and asks what that times 2 is, And Zoro coolly responds 216. Of course, Luffy mentions how long and difficult that is to say, so he just rounds all the way up to 300. We're then treated to a rare combo move by Zoro and Luffy as Luffy prepares his Gomu Gomu no cannon that he showed off earlier at the Franky house, and Zoro's 108-pound Phoenix. All the while, everyone is confused at what they're doing as they do the Gomu Gomu no 300-pound cannon together to blast a hole straight through the Aqua Laguna for the Rocket Man to pass through, to everyone's utter shock. I seriously have no idea and can't even begin to make sense of the physics of how this would work. But I mean, I guess in One Piece it looks really awesome, so I'll allow it because it's so damn satisfying and badass to see a combo move between Zoro and Luffy. Not only that, it showcases to everyone aboard the train just what kind of a force the Straw Hats really are. I mean, it's something that we already knew, and to an extent, they knew that they were strong. But it's always fun to see the other characters in the story react to the crazy strengths of the Straw Hats, and it's pretty damn exciting, actually. And if that badass scene wasn't enough, we go from that to a really heartwarming and inspirational scene as Luffy gets to finally catch up with Sanji and his situation. And I really love this scene as we get to see how well he knows his Nakama by this point in the story and how much he trusts them. However, in addition to that, Zoro is also shown to be somewhat concerned of Sanji as well, albeit in a very passive aggressive way. And I love that moment where Luffy gives Sanji permission to go wild on the train, and while Zoro protests, telling him that they should wait for backup due to the CP9 being insanely strong, with the obvious implication that he's kind of worried that Sanji will stand no chance against them. Of course, Luffy knows his crewmates better than anyone, and he knows that, just like himself or Zoro, if they were to be in that same position, they would undoubtedly do whatever they can, even if they were by themselves. And for me, I personally love these moments where we get a glimpse into their interpersonal dynamics between the crew and just how close they've become with each other throughout the journey. It gives us a real sense of progression and a level of intimate connection with the characters that not many other stories can actually rival, mostly because One Piece is such a long running series that, yeah, you really become attached to these characters and know every little thing about them. Another thing I wanted to mention about this scene is we get a lot of long shots of Usopp in deep contemplation and somewhat of a sense of shame with his eyes shadowed over after listening to what has been happening while he's been apart from the crew. And there are no doubt a lot of things going through his mind and a lot of things weighing on him, like how he obviously wants to help save Robin, but he doesn't know how he could possibly go along with the others, especially Luffy, with everything that's happened between them. And then Oda does something that completely plays with our emotions and subverts our expectations twice with Usopp, as he initially says that he has no obligation to help them and says that he's not going to help and just stays behind to the comfort and safety of the back car. But as we will see by the end of this episode, that is not the Usopp we know, but we will get to that in a little bit. Now, Franky has now become incredibly invested in their story and wants to do anything to help them, as well as having a vested interest in keeping Robin away from the world government, because it's not enough for him to be saved, for Pluton to not be in danger. Robin also needs to be saved as well, because she is the other way that Pluton could be used by the world government. And it's here we start to get the sense of the Franky chemistry with the Straw Hats as he's joined up with Sanji and potentially Usopp. We finally cut to T-Bone discovering the train car full of the injured agent Sanji beat up earlier, and we get the hilarious payoff to that cape-ripping gag. as he's been going up and to every injured soldier and agent providing first aid by continuously ripping pieces of his cape off. And now when you look at the cape, there's barely anything left as it's like as short as his elbows, and that thing went down all the way to his feet earlier. So he's used a lot. I'd say like 80% of his cape's gone by now. And yeah, I'm a very simple person, and when I saw this gag in the manga and in the anime, it kills me every time seeing that cape that short. However, during all this, while T-Bone is aiding all those injured people, another Marine soldier decides to I don't know why, maybe, and I may have missed this, but maybe he heard something, so he decides to look on top of the train car only to discover that Franky and Sanji are up there and tries to alert everyone, but before he can, We hear a certain someone fire a pachinko yelling "Metallic Star" at the Marine, knocking him overboard. And we think it's Usopp, but it turns out to be the sniper hero Sogeking. And this is it. Like, this has got to be one of the more awesome moments of Usopp and in the series. I loved this surprise subversion in Usopp so much. Like, Oda turns a very predictable story beat of obviously Usopp returning to help, but instead adds an insanely fun layer that none of us expected, which is the random superhero persona that Usopp creates. It's such an amazing moment. This is the start to when people really get to be won over by Usopp's character. Like, up till now, I've mentioned many times in the past, most people are either ambivalent or outright hate Usopp up to this point. But by the end of this arc, most everyone becomes an Usopp fan, and this moment is the beginning of that for many fans. But for many others who already were Usopp fans coming into this, we were all ecstatic to see where Oda takes the Sogeking persona. Again, just when you think Usopp is going to let you down, his bravery and courage comes through yet again. Because he can't face the other Straw Hats, especially Luffy, he comes up with a brand new persona called Sogeking to hide behind, which is understandable but also really stupid and funny. So Sogeking is a play on Sogeki, which means sniping and or marksmanship in Japanese, and it mashes it together with king because Sogeki is, you just have to add the ing and you get Sogeking. And yeah, obviously Sogeking can be translated to Sniper King, but I'm actually kind of glad that the Crunchyroll subs maintain calling him Sogeking because it's ultimately so much cooler, and that's what I'm going to call him. Usopp really gets into the Sogeking character, and he doesn't break character at all, or very much, as he has completely different speech patterns, and tone in his voice is different as well. In Japanese, he speaks much more with much more authority and has a very proper and formal way of speaking in Japanese, like referring to himself as watashi instead of the usual more casual ore. And so yeah, he changes a lot about himself to try and create this persona. The other change you'll notice is when he's using his Sogeking persona is when he calls out the names of his moves, they're in actual English instead of, so for example, Usopp would normally call Namariboshi, the move that he used to knock out that Marine. He actually yells out Metallic Star, which is exactly what that translates to. I also know what you're thinking because I was thinking this too at the time and for a long time. Where does he get the Sogeking mask? It's clear that he has to have gotten it at some point in this arc, as these types of masks are only found here in Water 7, but we never see him buy one, and following the sequence of events, there really would be no realistic point where Usopp would have been able to buy this mask off screen. So the prevailing theory is that Usopp got this mask off the train, as at the 651 mark in the Crunchyroll episode of episode 257, you can see what looks like a crude version of that mask lying in a suitcase amongst all the unconscious bodies of the world government, sort of at the bottom middle of the screen. It's not an exact match, but it's pretty close, and it's clear Usopp made some modifications to it, as when he has the finished product on, he has already incorporated his signature goggles into the eye sockets. So, yeah, most people, and I think I agree that that mask came from inside the train as he was working through it. If that wasn't enough awesomeness of Sogeking, in the very next episode, we get a full introduction to the hero, complete with his own intro theme song, which Usopp himself is singing in the vein similar to the Japanese 80s superhero shows that I grew up on as a kid, like Kamen Rider or Super Sentai, which is what the Power Rangers were adapted from, just as a fun fact. The lyrics itself are hilarious as well as informational in providing a small origin and backstory to Sogeking himself. I think the funniest thing about all this to me is that from our viewpoint, we get to see what Usopp envisions it in his head, but to Sanji and Franky, it's him just standing there in the rain singing to himself, and we get to see it from their point of view, and it's just, everything about this scene is just so funny. And this is one of those moments where the medium of the anime is a clear win, as we never get anything close to this awesomeness in the manga. Like, it's still a funny scene in the manga, but the fact that they went to the trouble of animating the opening theme and Yamaguchi Kappei singing, I mean, there's nothing that beats that. But if that wasn't enough, I can't help but burst out laughing when they sit down to start planning, and Sogeking just starts asking them questions, still in character. But Sanji and Franky are completely ignoring him. And this, in and of itself, is funny, but the freaking dialogue kills me every time. Especially the part where he asks, "Aren't you curious where the island of snipers is? It's in your heart." Like, come on. And I love how this comes back later, too. Unfortunately, it's not in this set of episodes. It will probably not be for a little while, but this comes back as another funny gag later on in, like, I think I'm going to say like 6 or so episodes, or maybe less. But I love how when he says it's in your heart, like how Sanji is annoyed, and you can tell by how Hiroaki Hirata slightly raises his voice ever so slightly to try and speak over Sogeking. We then cut back to the Rocket Man, where we get a weird moment where everyone watches Nami change, and I'm not sure why this was necessary, but okay. It leads to new outfit changes for the crew, though, but I want to know, where do they get all these clothes? Like, Nami, Chopper, and Zoro all get new jackets, but my favorite thus far is Luffy's new outfit. It's not that big of a change, but it looks so good. And to this day, it is one of my favorite Luffy outfits. He just gets these black cargo shorts, and the black on red color scheme just looks so damn good on Luffy. Like, this is easily one of my favorite Luffy outfits. It just looks really good. And there's one interesting bit of foreshadowing here. As Nami is reinforcing to Luffy to not lose and get stuck again, Luffy reassures her that this time it'll be alright, as there's a reason why he won't lose this time. This will be something to keep in mind, as it seems like he's thought of a strategy to combat the CP9 this time. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in the spoilers, though. Zoro then notices Nami's climb attack has changed, and Nami explains that Usopp has enhanced her climb attack with the dials received from Skypiea, just like he said he was going to, creating the perfect climb attack, which then leads to them being reminded of how sad they are due to his absence. And yeah, I really like that scene where they all go white, black and white, and really sad, and Zoro's like yelling at them not to be sad. But I think this goes to highlight how Usopp was mistaken in his thinking that he's not needed in the crew. I mean, he provides Nami with technical expertise to help her combat and increase her strength. But this will become a running theme going forward in the story, showing us how Usopp is actually vital to the crew, more so than he thought. And it's very in keeping with his overall character development for this arc. And I love, you know what? I really love the fact that, yes, this story revolves mostly around Robin. I do love that Usopp actually gets like a very consistent through line with his character development throughout this entire arc, as well as the whole saga, if you're going to count what happens in NES Lobby. This upgrade also pretty much guarantees that Nami is going to get her own solo fight again, but what I'm wondering is against who? At least that's what I thought at the time. Because Nami seems far too weak to be able to fight anyone in the CP9. But whatever the case, I do remember wanting so badly to get more of Usopp's stupid party tricks before Nami pulls out the actual combat functions of the new perfect clam attack. Like, just something to repeat the comedy of the first fight with Miss Doublefinger back in Alabasta. Anyways, going back to the Puffing Tom, Sanji comes up with a plan to trick all the soldiers and agents into the 7th car and detach the car, separating the reinforcements from the rest of the train. But this obviously presents an interesting conundrum for the incoming Rocket Man, as Sogeking notes, but Sanji is just like, I'm sure they'll figure it out, which again shows that sort of that trust that each of them mostly have with each other. As they moved up to the 5th car, we finally get to see the quote-unquote future Straw Hat Franky working with the Straw Hats for the first time, which is pretty cool. Usopp then decides to test Franky's body by poking him in the ass with a needle, and it surprisingly hurts him. We then come to find out that only his front side is a cyborg, as he performed all the work on himself, and leave it to Oda to introduce something as cool as a cyborg but put his own hilarious and quirky spin on it. This puts into context, though, just how insane Franky's resilience is. I mean, he was on the verge of death after being struck by a train at full speed, and yet he still somehow managed to survive that, treat himself, and then perform all these upgrade surgeries on himself. And That's just crazy to me. That takes some real like cojones to actually do. Now moving up to the fourth car, they're now in what looks like a kitchen car with a wacky looking chef named Wanze. And this guy is all sorts of WTF. Like, first off, he's voiced by the same man who voices Satori, Kotori, and Hotori from Skypiea, Yasuhiro Takatoso. He's got that crazy manic style voice down, but from his first introduction, he looks like he's on something like acid or cocaine. Like, he is just so ramped up. And Wanze has got to be one of the most absurd antagonists the series has seen thus far. And I know we've seen a lot of crazy ones, but only something. Well, so, I'm like at a loss for words. Only something like this would ever work in a series like One Piece, or maybe like a parody series like Gintama or something. Because he defies logic and physics in a way that's hard to suspend my disbelief, even in One Piece. Like, how does the whole eating flour and popping noodles out of his nose thing even work without a devil fruit? He snorts out hard noodles that can pierce through solid wood, and it would eventually go on to snot out enough noodles to make a whole noodle mech suit. And as ridiculous as Wanza is, he is actually a CP7 agent and seems like he can use some of the Rokushiki techniques at like Soru or Kamiya to a lesser degree, as he can kind of evade Sanji's speedy attacks, even if he plays it off like it's an accident. I don't think it's ever really confirmed whether he can actually use Rokushiki. I just like to kind of imagine that in my head because they must receive some kind of training. Wanze then goes on to explain that his nostrils are like sieves, which when he eats mouthfuls of flour and then snorts out noodles due to that. Like, I don't even know what to say to that. Like, what the heck? He then puts them in a ramen bowl and serves it to them, but they're obviously disgusted by this. It's like, who the hell would eat this? As they try and get past him to the next train car, he reveals that he has some combat prowess and intends to stop them using his ramen kempo. And this whole interaction between the three and Wanze is so funny. Like, Sanji realizing this guy is just going to get on the other two's nerves, accepts the fight, only to immediately fall into Wanze's pace as he thinks Sanji's epic challenge was aimed at some non-existent person behind Wanze. There's just that whole moment of Sanji just sort of talking to him all serious like, and then Wanze just turns around looking to somebody who's not even there. It's just so ridiculous. But this sets up a battle of the cooks as he tells the other two to move ahead to the next car. This fight does make me laugh a couple times, like Wanze saying Sanji has a weird face with his curly brows, with Sanji barking back, "You're one to talk about weird faces." I do like that while there isn't too much emotional weight to this fight, Oda still manages to inject some depth and dimensions to it. Because as a cook himself, and especially a cook that survived over a month of starvation, Sanji deeply hates the wasting of food, which is a trait we've seen ever since his introduction with full body wasting that soup. So naturally, Sanji seeing a cook so blatantly waste food offends him pretty deeply, and it sort of adds a bit more depth to this otherwise insignificant fight for the most part. However, beyond that, there is one other really cool aspect about this fight that I absolutely love, and why this fight will forever be one of the more memorable Sanji fights to me. Like I mentioned earlier, Wanze makes a noodle mech suit, and I don't think that's how noodles work, but okay. Anyways, the suit proves to be an issue for Sanji as his kicks get stuck in the noodles, leaving him defenseless. And before I get to the actual cool thing, can we just take a minute to appreciate how hard Sanji's hair is working to make sure we still don't see his left eye? Like, it's defying the laws of gravity to keep it hidden. And I always got a kick out of all the early memes around the earlier part of One Piece about Sanji's eye. Like, what could he be hiding under that hair? And there were some funny ones, like that he had Sharingan from Naruto, or that he didn't have an eye at all, or some of the other outrageous designs for how the eyebrow would curl, like just these ridiculous looking ones. But yeah, it's always pretty funny at the time. And when I saw this scene, I was just thinking, man, Oda really doesn't want us to see what's under his eye. Of course, we will eventually get to see the answer to that. But speaking of the curly eyebrow, I feel like that scene where Wanze gets dizzy from Sanji's eyebrows, like, is it just me or are there more curls in that eyebrow than usual? I don't know. That's just something that stood out to me as the camera zooms in on Sanji's eyebrow. It looks like there's like another set of curls almost. Okay, so back to the cool thing that I was talking about. After getting beat around for a while, Sanji needs a way to fight back against the noodles and unleashes something I never even expected. And I love when Oda manages to catch me by complete surprise with his creativity and spontaneity. As we see Sanji break through the noodles, suddenly with kitchen knives, we see that still of him in that knelt down position with the knives, and I was like, no way. Sanji can fight with knives? And I was like, is he really gonna fight back with something other than kicks? I mean, this moment really blew my mind for some reason. Like, I love that Oda does this while still keeping it true to Sanji's character. As Sanji's, like he says, in the past won't use his hands for combat as they are the life of a cook. But seeing as how they're in a kitchen and his opponent is essentially food, it makes sense to fight like this. Unfortunately, we don't get to see the conclusion of this fight till the next episode, so we'll have to wait on that. But catching back up with Franky on top of Car 3, we see him face to face with the supposed newest member of the CP9, Nero. First off, I love how the scene transitions to this moment as we get Franky sternly saying, "Who the hell are you?" But then the camera quick cuts to Franky in his absurd, iconic super pose, undercutting all the cool factor. And you know, it's funny, in the manga, it just immediately shows Franky in this pose, but I love how you hear Franky start speaking and you're expecting him to kind of just like stand there all tough, but then it cuts to him already in that Franky super pose. I don't know, it gets a chuckle out of me all the time. Despite being a CP9 member, we can surmise he's not as strong as the other members, as he even states he can only use 4 powers or Yonshiki. We later find out that the two he's unable to use are Shigan and Tekkai, and this then sets up Franky's one-on-one fight, with presumably Usopp's plan to sneak ahead to Robin while Franky keeps Nero busy. We won't get to see the conclusion of this fight either until the next episodes. But we leave on the cliffhanger of Usopp actually reaching Robin to her utter shock using the octopus shoes that he used in Skypiea. And I love how throughout this episode, anytime Sogeking appears on screen, his theme song starts to blare. But this time has got to be the best as it cuts off with the to be continued card. And so it starts off with a da 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 and then it goes to be continued. And yeah, I thought that was really funny. So yeah, we leave on 3 different cliffhangers, and out of all 3 of them, the biggest one is probably Usopp finally being able to reach Robin. I remember when I got to this moment, I was thinking to myself, if anyone could actually get through to her, it might actually be Usopp because he seems to be the most human and most relatable of the crew. Plus, he's also the one who's most scared of everything too. And so he kind of, I feel like, could relate to the Robin's fear of the danger that she poses to the Straw Hats. Plus, also tying into his own story, Usopp knows what leaving the crew really means. So it'll be interesting to see how he actually gets through to Robin, or if he's even able to. Well, that brings us to a close here. If you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, and if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates of when I post new episodes, or see some pictures of my manga collection. Please check those out. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. I'll have a really, really short spoiler section. I just wanted to talk about one thing that I mentioned in the non spoiler section so far. But yeah, if not, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. All right, so spoiler section. I think the main thing I wanted to talk about was obviously sort of that foreshadowing of Nami telling Luffy not to mess it up this time, and Luffy saying to her that he's got a plan for beating them. And yeah, that turns out to not necessarily be a plan, but actually a new set of moves. So he's already referencing the fact that he has figured out how to do gear second and gear third by this point. And it's interesting how it's Oda sets this up because he mentions it one more time that they're later on, I think in the a couple episodes later, he'll mention something like that he's got a new move that he wants to try out. And again, he's referencing gear second and gear third. And yeah, it's funny because I remember when Gear Second and Gear Third were introduced, people were like, it's really cool and awesome, but it's like, how did he learn all this? Where did this even come from? And when did he have time to even train this? Because the explanation is that he learned this by observing the CP9 do the Rokushikis, particularly Soru. And so clearly he only had like half a day to figure all this out. But I think, and this is going to be, if you don't want any spoilers for anything potentially in Wano, particularly the third act of Wano, I would not listen to this portion. But given what we find out in the third act of Wano, with the fact that Luffy's devil fruit is not actually just the Gomu Gomu no Mi, but it's instead the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika. And the way that that fruit is explained is that the power of that fruit is only limited by the imagination. And so it kind of makes sense that just because Luffy imagined or thought up of something, he actually was able to produce it. And it makes sense now, like why he was able to come up with Gear Second and Gear Third so quickly. Because he literally just thought it up into existence after seeing how the CP9 move and how they do their techniques. But yeah, I always thought that was really interesting, and it provides a whole new context to like how Gear Second and Gear Third came about. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to mention is the fact that I am a little disappointed that this is the only time we ever get to see Sanji use the knives to fight. I kind of wish he would use the knives a little bit more, but I guess that really doesn't make any sense. Because, I mean, he's not necessarily like a swordsman or like a thief type character. He's literally a brawler. So, I mean, I guess it's just a one time thing, but I kind of wish it would come back a little bit. Anyways, that's it for the spoiler section. So, yeah, thanks for listening, and I will see you on the next episode. See ya.